She arrived a little earlier than most people that day. The community center hallway was quiet, and only the soft echo of distant footsteps could be heard. She held her bag close, trying not to look too nervous, though inside she felt her heart beating faster with every step she took. She had heard that a famous professor was holding a small workshop for music students, and something inside her pushed her to go. She didn't know why she felt such a strong pull, but she did. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe longing, or maybe the simple dream she had carried inside for years. When she reached the room, she peeked inside. The large piano in the center instantly caught her attention. It wasn't like any piano she had played on before. At home, she only had a small old keyboard that had missing buttons and made strange sounds when the power flickered. But this piano, this one looked like something from another world. Smooth, polished, shining under the soft lights. She stepped into the room slowly, trying not to disturb anyone. A few students were already inside, talking among themselves, arranging their sheets, tuning their instruments. Some noticed her, but only for a brief moment, then went back to their conversations. She didn't mind. She was used to being unnoticed. Then she saw him, the professor. He stood near the piano, wearing a serious expression, like someone who had spent many years in front of students and expected everyone to know their place. He was known for being strict, but many people respected him because he had taught some of the most talented performers in the city. She walked closer, hoping she could ask a question before the room filled up. But before she could speak, the professor glanced at her in a way that made her already tired confidence shrink. It was the kind of look that people give when they think they already know everything about you without hearing a single word. "Yes? Can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. She swallowed softly. I was wondering if I could try the piano for a moment. Just a few notes. His reaction was immediate. A quick laugh slipped out, short, sharp, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor but disbelief. Some students turned their heads at the sound. They looked at her, then at him, confused about what was so funny. "You want to try the piano?" he repeated, still looking at her with disbelief. "This workshop is for serious learners, people who have some real experience." He said it as if he was trying to explain something obvious to someone who wouldn't understand. She didn't get angry. She didn't even look surprised. She had heard this same tone many times before from different people in different places. She had lost count of how many times someone judged her before hearing her play, before giving her a chance. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I only want to try it for a moment. If it's okay." The professor took a breath, then crossed his arms, studying her from head to toe. Her clothes were simple, nothing special. Her shoes were old. She didn't carry sheet music like the others. He must have assumed she wasn't trained or serious enough. And maybe to him that was enough reason to dismiss her. A few students exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Maybe she wants to try for fun." Another said softly, "I don't think the professor will allow it." The room felt heavier suddenly, and not because of any noise. It was one of those moments when someone feels out of place without even doing anything wrong. She stood there calmly, but inside she could feel the familiar sting of being underestimated. Still, she didn't lower her head. She stayed steady, almost gentle. The professor sighed, as if giving her time on the piano would ruin his schedule. "Look," he said, "this is not a show. The students who come here have prepared pieces to present. They have practiced for weeks. So please understand, we cannot let anyone just walk in and play." She didn't step back. She didn't walk away. Instead, she spoke again, but softer this time. "I know. I'm not trying to interrupt anyone's work. I only want to touch the keys for a moment. Just to try." Her voice wasn't demanding. It wasn't shaky either. It was calm, steady, almost hopeful. And for a second, even the professor seemed unsure how to respond to that tone. One of the students spoke up. "Sir, it's just a minute. Maybe we can let her try?" The professor looked at the student, slightly annoyed. "This is not a playground," he said. She lowered her eyes. Not because she was embarrassed, but because she didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. She had learned long ago that sometimes people resist kindness more than they resist arrogance. But she gathered her courage again and looked back at the professor. "I promise I won't take long," she said. Her quiet confidence made the room fall silent for a moment. Even the professor sensed something different, something he didn't fully understand. Maybe it was the way she stood there without shrinking. Maybe it was her steady voice. Maybe it was something else he couldn't explain. He finally exhaled, almost annoyed at himself for giving in. "Fine," he said. "1 minute. But please understand, I do not expect anything. And don't press too hard on the keys. This instrument is expensive." That last sentence made a few students smile awkwardly, unsure if he was joking or serious. She simply nodded. Double quotes. "Thank you," she said gently. She walked toward the piano, each step slow and thoughtful. Her fingers brushed the edge of the instrument and she paused. She wasn't scared. She wasn't doubtful. She was simply taking a moment to appreciate something she had always dreamed of, to sit at a real piano like this. She reached for the bench and adjusted it quietly. No one in the room spoke now. Some were curious, some confused, and a few were already preparing to be unimpressed. Thinking she would play random notes or something too basic, the professor stood with his arms crossed, waiting to be proven right. Inside her mind, memories floated, hours spent on her old keyboard, practicing after long days, teaching herself through trial and error, repeating the same mistakes until she corrected them. She remembered nights when the electricity failed, and she practiced finger movements on a silent keyboard, imagining the sound. She remembered how often she wished she could one day play on a real piano, not something broken or borrowed. And now she was here. She took a soft breath and placed her hands on the keys. They felt colder than she expected, but smoother than anything she had ever touched. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the silence settle around her. Behind her, the professor waited, prepared to remind her of the time limit, but before he could say anything, she pressed the first note, soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. Even though she only played one note, something shifted in the air. A few students stopped fidgeting. Someone took a small step closer. The professor blinked, surprised by the unexpected clarity of the sound she produced. She didn't rush. She wasn't trying to prove anything yet. She simply pressed another note, then another, letting each one breathe. Her hands moved slowly, not performing a full piece yet, but exploring, feeling, connecting. She had waited so long for this moment that she wanted to honor it. Even if nobody else understood, the room, which had been filled with quiet murmurs earlier, now felt still. She didn't begin the real melody, not yet. That moment would come later, but with every note she touched, something inside her began to open. Like the door she had kept closed for too many years. And without realizing it, everyone in the room, including the professor, found their eyes drawn toward her hands. They didn't know yet what she was capable of. They didn't know yet what would happen when she really started to play, but something in the air told them that the moment she played her first real note, the entire atmosphere would change. She sat there with her hands resting on the keys, and the room watched her like they were waiting for something to happen. For a moment she didn't move. She just breathed in slowly, as if she was trying to feel the piano, understand it, connect with it. It almost seemed like she was talking to the instrument in her mind, asking it to trust her for a few minutes. The professor shifted his weight, growing impatient. He looked at his watch and then at her again. He didn't say anything, but his body language clearly showed that he didn't expect much. He was sure she would play a few uneven notes, maybe something basic that would last only a few seconds, and then she would step away quietly. That's what he believed, and nothing in his expression suggested he thought otherwise, but she wasn't in a hurry. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, not pressing them yet. Her hands looked calm, but inside she could feel her heart beating a little faster. She didn't know if the professor would stop her halfway. She didn't know if the students would laugh. But she had decided something long before she entered this room. If she got even one chance to play on a real piano, she would not waste it. A few students leaned forward, curious. The room wasn't crowded, but there were enough people watching her to make anyone feel nervous. She didn't let that bother her. She wasn't here to show off. She was here because something inside her had carried her to this moment. Step by step, without letting her give up, she pressed the next note, soft and slow. Then another. The sounds blended smoothly, like water flowing gently over rocks. Her fingers moved lightly, not performing yet, just warming up, but even that warm-up had something special in it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Yet the sound carried a kind of feeling that made a few students forget about their own conversations and focus only on her hands. Someone whispered, "She plays so softly." Another whispered back, "But the notes sound clean." The professor heard the whispers but acted like they didn't matter. He kept his arms crossed and kept his strict expression, but his eyes stayed on her hands. He wasn't ready to admit it, but something about the way she touched the keys made him pause inside. She took another breath and finally shifted her posture, sitting a little taller. Her shoulders relaxed and her fingers slid into a position that only experienced players use. That tiny detail didn't go unnoticed. One of the students, who had trained for many years, stared at her hands with growing surprise. She began to play a small sequence, just a simple line of notes. But simple didn't mean ordinary. The way she shaped each note, the way she controlled the sound, the way she let each tone rise and fall, it felt alive. It felt like the music wasn't coming from her fingers but from somewhere deeper inside her, somewhere she never showed to anyone. The professor blinked slowly. Something in his expression shifted. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't even smirking. He had seen thousands of students over the years, and he could recognize skill even in the first few seconds. This girl was not guessing her way through the keys. She wasn't experimenting. She wasn't copying something she half knew. No. She was playing with intention. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't look at anyone. She just let the music guide her movements. One note following the next, gentle at first, shaping itself carefully like a painter. Making the first strokes on a blank canvas, the students watched as the room slowly changed. The air felt different now. The background noises had disappeared. Even the sound of someone adjusting their chair stopped. She had unintentionally created a bubble of silence around her, and everyone was pulled into it without resistance. After a minute of slow playing, she paused. Her hands hovered above the keys again, but this time she didn't stop because she was unsure. She paused because she was ready. She was about to start something real, the melody she had practiced countless times on her old keyboard at home. She had never played it on a grand piano before, but she had imagined it so many times that she trusted herself completely. She pressed the first note of the real piece. It was soft but deeper than before. Then came the second, blending right into the third. The melody formed itself immediately, like a story unfolding one sentence at a time. Her hands moved gracefully, and each note seemed to land exactly where it belonged. A student near the front whispered, "She's playing like someone who's been trained." Another replied, "No, she's playing like someone who taught herself." That second comment made the professor tilt his head slightly. He knew the difference. Trained students often moved mechanically in the beginning, trying to remember every instruction. Self-taught players, the ones with real passion, moved with a kind of freedom but also a deep discipline they built on their own. He watched her carefully now, trying to understand her. She moved into the next part of the melody, her fingers gliding faster. She didn't force the notes. She didn't overplay. She let the music breathe, giving it space to rise and fall naturally. And as she played, something beautiful happened. The piano itself seemed to respond to her. It was as if the instrument recognized someone who respected it. The professor uncrossed his arms slowly. He didn't even realize he was doing it. His eyebrows relaxed and he tilted forward slightly. The arrogance that had been on his face earlier faded, replaced by curiosity, and something close to disbelief. She was lost in the music now, unaware of the small changes happening in the room. She didn't see the student who lowered their notebook to listen better. She didn't see the girl who had stopped tuning her violin and now stood silently, eyes fixed on the piano. She didn't see the professor's face soften. She didn't see any of it. To her, the room didn't exist anymore. Only the piano did. Her hands danced across the keys, moving with a confidence that surprised everyone watching. There was a softness in her playing, but also strength. There was control, but also emotion. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply letting the music come out the way it lived inside her. She reached the middle section of the melody slightly faster, slightly brighter, but she didn't rush. She let the sound fill the room, growing a little louder, but never harsh. The piano responded beautifully, its rich tones spreading through the air like warm light. The professor finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "How is she playing like this?" He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but a student beside him heard it. That student stared at the professor with wide eyes. It was rare, almost impossible, to hear the professor sound unsure. The melody continued, each note landing with precision. She had practiced this part so many times at home, even though her keyboard couldn't produce half the sound this piano could. But she had imagined the richness. She had imagined the depth. She had imagined everything. And now, for the first time, she could hear it for real. The students could feel something stirring inside them, some kind of emotion they hadn't expected. They came to the workshop hoping to learn from the professor, but now they were learning from someone who hadn't even introduced herself. She reached the quieter section again. Her hands slowed, the notes softening like a gentle breeze. The room fell deeper into silence, listening closely. Someone whispered, "I didn't expect this." Another whispered back, "Nobody did." The professor took a deep breath, and for the first time since she entered, he uncrossed his arms fully and let them rest by his sides. He looked almost humbled, as if the room had suddenly shown him something he had forgotten long ago, and she kept playing, unaware that her simple request to play just for a moment had already changed everything around her, even before she reached the final note. The room was so quiet now that even the soft sound of the pedals moving could be heard. She didn't think about the professor watching her. She didn't think about the students staring in disbelief. She didn't think about the fact that she had only asked for 1 minute but had already played far longer. None of that mattered anymore. She was inside the music. And it was inside her. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, speeding up then slowing down, rising and falling like a gentle story being told without words. Every note carried a piece of her quiet nights, her struggles, her patience, her hope. It was a kind of honesty that didn't need explanations. The room, filled earlier with small murmurs and the busy energy of a workshop, now felt like a different place. Even the lights seemed softer somehow. Everyone stood still, not wanting to miss a single moment. A few students forgot they were holding their breath. One of them had their hand over their chest, feeling something they couldn't describe. The professor, who had laughed earlier, now looked like someone who wished he could take that moment back. His eyes followed every movement of her hands, trying to understand how someone who appeared so quiet, so unnoticed, could play with such depth. He had taught many talented students, but this girl, there was something different about her. Something real. She shifted into the next section of the melody, a part that required both speed and softness. Her fingers glided rapidly over the keys, but not in a way that felt rushed or messy. It was controlled, smooth, like she knew exactly where every note belonged before her fingers even touched the keys. The students watched in amazement. Some of them had practiced for years to play like that, but even with training it wasn't easy. One student leaned toward another and whispered, "I can't play that section without messing up." The other whispered back, "She's not even looking at her hands." And it was true. Her eyes stayed closed, her face calm. She wasn't counting the beats. She wasn't thinking about mistakes. She was just, playing. Completely free, suddenly she moved into a brighter part of the piece. The notes sparkled like small drops of light, rising and falling in a pattern that was both beautiful and unexpected. Her left hand played softly, steady, creating a warm bass, while her right hand danced lightly across the upper keys. The professor felt something stir. Inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. He remembered why he had first fallen in love with music, long before he became strict, long before he became a teacher known more for his rules than his heart. He had once played with that kind of feeling. He had once believed music could touch people in ways nothing else could. But over the years, life had hardened him, made him think more about precision than passion. Watching her brought that old memory back to life. She continued playing, unaware that she had awakened something in the room, not just surprise, but emotion. Pure emotion that connected everyone silently. The melody soon shifted again, becoming deeper and more emotional. The lower notes filled the room like a warm wave, strong and heartfelt. She pressed them gently but firmly, allowing the sound to carry weight. Her right hand followed with delicate notes that felt like whispered thoughts floating above the deeper tones. It was the kind of music that pulled feelings out of people, feelings they didn't always admit they had. A student near the back felt their eyes sting, though they didn't understand why. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't happiness. It was something in between, something that came from listening to someone who played with her whole heart. Another student had a small smile on their face, touched by the way the music felt peaceful and honest. The professor's breathing slowed. His shoulders, always tense, relaxed without him noticing. His eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, he listened not as a critic, but as someone who loved music. Then she reached the most difficult part of the piece, the section she had always struggled with on her old keyboard. At home, the keys often stuck, and she could never hear the true sound of this moment. But here, on this piano, it was like the melody finally had the voice it had waited for. Her fingers moved quickly, weaving through complex patterns, shifting between soft and strong, light and bold. She didn't miss a single note. Her timing was perfect. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful, as if she had been waiting her whole life to play this part the way it was meant to be played. Few students unconsciously stepped closer. The room felt like a performance hall now, even though there was no stage, no spotlight, no audience except the small group around her. But they felt like they were watching something important, something unforgettable. The brightness of the melody grew, filling the room with energy. The students felt it. The professor felt it. Even she felt it, though she was too deep in the music to fully realize how much she was affecting everyone. She reached the peak of the melody, her hands moving at a speed that surprised even the professor. But her playing wasn't just fast, it was expressive. She didn't lose the emotion in the rush. Every note still felt meaningful. When she struck the last bright chord of that section, the sound rang through the room like a small burst of light. And then slowly, she let the music drift into the softer ending gentle notes, spaced apart, each one carrying a feeling of calm and closure. Her hands slowed, the melody returning to the quiet tone she had started with. It felt like a story coming back home, a journey ending exactly where it needed to. The room stayed silent. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted the moment to end. She kept her fingers on the keys for one more second, letting the final note fade naturally into the air. Then she lifted her hands slowly and let them rest on her lap. She opened her eyes. Her breathing was calm, but her heart was full. She had played the entire piece without realizing how long she had been at the piano. She didn't know if she had broken the professor's rule. She didn't know if she had annoyed anyone. She only hoped she hadn't taken too much time. She turned her head slightly, expecting someone to tell her that her minute was over, expecting the professor to remind her that she wasn't supposed to play so long. But what she saw left her frozen in surprise. The entire room was staring at her, eyes wide, faces stunned, expressions full of emotions she didn't understand. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't pity. It was awe, real awe. The professor stood with his arms no longer crossed, his posture softer than anyone had ever seen. His mouth was slightly open, not in disapproval but in absolute shock. His face had changed completely since the moment she asked to play. There was no trace of the earlier arrogance, no trace of the dismissive smile. He looked like someone who had just witnessed something remarkable. A long, heavy silence filled the room. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that follows a beautiful moment, a silence full of respect. One student finally whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "How did she play like that?" Another whispered, "I've never heard anything like it." Someone else whispered, "That wasn't just playing. That was something else." She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to people staring at her like this. She wasn't used to people hearing her music at all. The professor took a small step forward. His voice, when he finally spoke, was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "That wasn't—" "1 minute," he said slowly, almost apologetically. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" "No," he cut in gently. "I didn't want it to stop." The room stayed absolutely still. Even she didn't breathe for a moment, and without realizing it, with that single performance, she had not only captured every eye in the room, she had changed the entire atmosphere. The professor's attitude, and the way everyone saw her. In just a few minutes of playing, everything had shifted. Everything. For a few seconds, nobody in the room said anything. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She looked around slowly, unsure what she was supposed to do. She wondered if she had done something wrong by playing too long. She wondered if she had broken some rule the professor didn't mention. But the expressions on their faces told a different story, something she never expected to see. The professor took another step forward, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how to approach her after what he had just witnessed. His voice, usually firm and strict, sounded almost gentle when he spoke again. "You didn't just play a piece," he said quietly. "You told a story." She lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to praise. At home, she played alone. Her music had never been heard by a real audience, not even a small one. She had never imagined a moment like this, standing in a room where everyone listened to her with such attention. Such emotion. One of the students, still looking stunned, asked her, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. She didn't know how to explain it in a way that would make sense to them. She wasn't trained. She hadn't studied under any teacher. She hadn't been to music school. For years, she had taught herself one note at a time, sometimes in silence when the electricity was gone, sometimes in frustration when the keyboard refused to work, sometimes in moments when the world outside felt too heavy and music was the only thing that could lift her up. "I just practiced," she said softly. The professor let out a slow breath, like he was letting go of something heavy he had carried for too long. He walked closer to the piano, looking at the keys she had just played on, almost with respect. "Practiced where?" a student asked, still unable to understand how someone without training could play with such emotion and skill. "At home," she replied, "on a small keyboard. It's old. Some keys don't work." That answer hit the room like a quiet shock. A few students exchanged looks. The professor stared at her, this time with something close to disbelief mixed with admiration. "You learned all of that?" "On a broken keyboard?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. She nodded slowly. The professor placed a hand on the edge of the piano, like he needed support. It was clear he didn't expect this. His assumptions about her appearance, her silence, her simple clothing had been completely wrong. And he knew it. He looked at her again, but this time without arrogance or judgment. His expression was open now, humbled and maybe even grateful. "You have a gift," he said. "A rare one?" She didn't know what to say. Compliments like this didn't happen to her. She wasn't used to people noticing her at all, let alone praising her. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had practiced for years without anyone seeing. Another student stepped forward, smiling. "That was the most beautiful performance I've heard in a long time," they said. "You made the room feel different." Someone else added, "The way you played, I felt it here." They touched their chest lightly. She listened quietly, still unsure how to accept the warm words coming from every corner of the room. She felt like she was dreaming, like the moment wasn't real. Like she would wake up at home and find herself sitting in front of her old keyboard again. The professor cleared his throat. Not out of irritation this time, but because he seemed overwhelmed. He stood straighter, trying to regain his composure, but his voice still held a softness people weren't used to hearing from him. "I need to apologize," he said, looking directly at her. I judged you before giving you a chance. That was wrong. The students were surprised. It was rare for the professor to apologize to anyone. He was known for being firm, confident, and sometimes too strict. But in this moment he sounded sincere. She shook her head gently. "It's okay," she said. "I understand." "No," the professor insisted softly. "You shouldn't understand. People shouldn't be judged like that. You came here with respect, and I didn't show the same in return." His words made the room even quieter. Then he took a breath and continued. "If you're willing, I would like you to join my advanced class." Her eyes widened. She blinked slowly, trying to process what she had just heard. The advanced class was something students dreamed about. Only the best were invited, and even they often struggled to keep up. For someone who had never trained formally, being invited was almost unthinkable. She looked around the room, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The students weren't surprised, though. Some were already nodding in approval, still amazed by what they had just witnessed. "You want me in your class?" she asked quietly. "Yes," the professor replied. "I want you to learn, to grow, to use the talent you clearly have. You deserve a proper place to practice. You deserve guidance. And I think I can help you." His voice wasn't proud or boastful. It was humble, but she didn't respond right away. A small conflict formed inside her, not fear, but something close to disbelief. She had always played alone with no one to guide her. She had always learned through mistakes, through patience, through trial and error. She had never imagined a teacher would want her in their class. "What if I don't fit in?" she asked softly. "You already do," the professor said. "You fit in the moment you touch the piano." A few students nodded in agreement. One said gently, "We'd be lucky to have you with us." She looked at the piano again. A part of her still felt like she didn't belong in a room like this, surrounded by people who had trained for years. But another part of her, stronger, now felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging, not because of how she looked, not because of where she came from, but because of what she carried inside her. She took a slow breath. "If you really think I can learn here," she said quietly, "then I would like to try." The professor smiled, not a forced smile, not a polite one, but a real smile. The kind that comes from respect. "Good," he said. "We begin tomorrow." The students clapped softly, not like an audience, but like a group welcoming someone they truly admired. She felt warmth rise in her chest, an emotion she couldn't name at first, but soon realized was joy. Real joy, as she stood up from the piano. A few students approached her, asking about her music, telling her how much her performance meant to them. She answered shyly, still unused to attention. But their kindness made her feel comfortable. The professor walked closer and spoke quietly, almost as if sharing a secret. "When you played," he said, "you reminded me why music matters. You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago." He paused, searching for the right words. "You reminded me to feel." Her eyes softened. She didn't know she had done something so meaningful. She hadn't tried to teach anyone anything. She had only played from her heart, but sometimes that's enough. Sometimes. That's everything. As she left the room that day, the piano behind her, and the warm voices of the students still echoing in her ears, she felt lighter. The hallways didn't feel so long anymore. The world didn't feel so heavy. The dream she carried quietly inside her suddenly felt possible, not because someone gave her permission to dream, but because she finally realized her music had a place in the world, not in the moment. She touched that piano the moment she played her first real note. She didn't just change the atmosphere of the room, she changed her future, and the future of everyone who heard her.